Hello and welcome to Speaking Spirit, where we talk about all things spiritual. Your host, John Moore, is a shamanic practitioner and spiritual teacher. And now, here's John.
Hello, everybody. Good morning, or whatever time of day it is where you are when you are listening to this. It is morning here. It is a brisk morning. It's November in Maine, where I live, and it was about 24 degrees Fahrenheit this morning when I drove my daughters to school. That, for you in the world of Celsius, is below zero. It's freezing. Ice on my windshield this morning when I went out to my car. It's cold, but it's nice. It's nice to feel the brisk air. I'm one of these people that, that enjoys the changes in seasons a whole lot. It's one of the nice things about living in the Northeast. Today, my friends, I'm going to talk to you about mysterious things. I'm going to talk to you about astral projection, the astral body, the astral plane, and I am going to relate it all to shamanism because that's what I know. I'm sure there are lots of other people who have different perspectives, and that's cool. But I do try to not speak from a perspective that I don't have. That would not be helpful for anyone, and it would make me look silly. And that's not something I want to do. So I'm going to talk about the astral today, particularly the astral body and astral travel, astral projection, the astral plane. But I think, what I need to do first is to set a baseline and to set up, this is something I always like to do. I like to define my terms and talk about, set a baseline for what I'm explaining. And this is not because my explanations are better than anybody else's. Or that I expect you to, adopt my definitions without question. This is only so that you can better understand what I mean when I'm talking about what I happen to be talking about. So I'm going to set a baseline. I'm going to talk about some definitions, and certainly I'm going to be talking about spiritual things which are non-physical and are experienced in different ways depending upon who you are and what culture you come from and all kinds of things. So there will be definitions of the same word that don't match mine. There will be different words used for the same things that I'm describing, and that's totally fine. These are not contradictions. These are just differences in the way that words are used. So, for example, in the United States where I live, I call something an elevator, and in the UK, they call it a lift. Who's right and who's wrong? Well, nobody's wrong, right? We just use different words for the same thing. And, there are other words where over there, a biscuit means something, means what we would call a cookie over here. I watch a lot of the Great British Baking Show. It's one of my favorite shows. And I have to remember when they're talking about biscuits, they're not talking about what we call biscuits. Is that right? It's not right or wrong. It's just how they're using words. So that's my only intention when I say this is what this means. It is always what it means to me. And whether or not you adopt that, it doesn't matter to me if you adopt my definitions of things. I want to create understanding between us. So I'm gonna start by talking about a little bit about models, and I promise I'm gonna get to where I'm going. I promise I'm gonna get to the astral stuff first, but I need to talk about models a little bit. And what I mean by a model is a representation of something that is symbolic, but in a representational way. So if I look at the word food written out on a piece of paper, that's a symbol for food, but it's not representational. It doesn't look like food, right? I can't pick it up. I can't. But when my daughters were little, they played with little plastic. They played with plastic representations of food a lot. We had plastic fruit and plastic this and plastic that, and they would play grocery store and kitchen and, I don't know, throw plastic fruit at each other, whatever they would do with it. Those are models of fruit. They are not fruit. They are models because they're representational. Okay, so a model includes something that might, like a map. A map is a representation of, an area. I use maps all the time. When I'm trying to get places, maps in my phone, my GPS helps me navigate places where I would get lost normally. And the map in there is a model because the model is not the road, but the road is represented there. And I can, it is somewhat useful to me to be able to look at a representation of the road and see where I'm supposed to be going. So models always have two limitations, right? Every model, no matter what it is, if it's a model of, it's a plastic model of food or a map or a model, a plastic model that you build or an architect's model that they build of a building they're about to construct or a mental model, which is a representation of something. All models have two major limitations, and we'll call those limitations deletions and distortions, right? So deletions are that all maps delete a certain amount of information. There are no maps that I'm aware of out there that are, first of all, one-for-one representations, right? There's an old joke from the comedian Stephen Wright who said, I have a full-scale map of the United States. It says 1 mile equals 1 mile. It's very difficult to fold, right? It's kind of funny if you think about that. That wouldn't be a very useful map, right? And so all maps delete certain amounts of information. So if I'm looking at a topographical map, for example, it's going to show me elevation and lakes and all of that stuff, but it probably not going to show me like population density because that's not useful when I'm using that kind of map, when I'm trying to like navigate a mountain range or something like that. And a street map is a different kind of map, and that helps me navigate the streets, but it might not show me elevation, or it might not show me where people's houses are. So it necessarily deletes information. No map is complete. And when we understand that, we can start to question our own mental models of things. When we think we know everything about anything, trust me, we do not. Because everything that we hold in our minds are models, or models of what the reality of something is. And you can know a whole lot about something, right? You could be an expert in... I went to school with somebody who was studying fish neurology, right? I have to say that is, he's probably the only person there are probably lots of fish neurologists out there, but that's a very specific thing, and you can gain a lot of expertise when you learn something. But does he know absolutely everything there is to know about fish neurology? Probably not. Or a specific nervous system of specific breed of fish. He would know certainly more than I do. So this person has a mental model of fish neurology that is probably much more detailed, has much less deletion than I have. So that is the first limitation, is deletion, and the other one is distortion, and that no map is a perfect representation. Some maps some models get really close. The plastic fruit model is not very accurate. The shapes, the sizes might be different. If I cut it open, it's not going to look the same on the inside. If I look at it under a microscope, it's not going to have cells the way fruit might. Same thing with a map. Map's going to distort slightly. And, we know that there are inaccuracies in all maps. There's a level of inaccuracy. There some distortions there. Also, the Earth is round. I hate to tell you, if you think the Earth is flat, I have actually flown around the Earth, and it is a ball like every other planet in our solar system and most likely in the universe. It is a ball, and it's round. So when I have a map that I can lay out flat on a table, it has to distort because, it might try to represent the curvature of the Earth. But again, it's a flat map. If you've ever seen the, maps of the world where they try to lay out all the countries on a flat surface, are incredibly distorted. They have to be, because the world isn't flat. It's a globe. And when you try to lay everything out, and it doesn't curve, right? So things on the same latitude don't curve around the poles. That is very distorted. So all maps delete and distort. Why am I talking about... I'm using the term map and model kind of interchangeably here, sorry. Why am I talking about models? Why am I talking about maps? Well, because I'm going to... And I spent a lot of time on this, and I realize this, but it's really important. It's really important. Even beyond what I'm going to talk about today, to start to look at the models of things we hold in our brains, in our consciousness, in our unconsciousness. We look at the models of things and we start to realize that everything we look at, everything we think we know is missing information and is distorted. Right? So we do not 100% accurately know anything. That's just impossible. And becoming comfortable with that is a cool thing. It allows us to play with our perception of reality a little bit. Robert Anton Wilson, whether you like his writing or not, wrote about we live in these reality tunnels. We live in these paradigms, these reality tunnels where, if something really bizarre happens outside of the tunnel vision we have about the reality we live in, we tend to negate it because it's hard for us to grasp. And we have this thing called cognitive dissonance, which is it's hard to hold competing feelings or competing ideas in your head at the same time. So I believe that the world is round. I have experienced the world is round. I've been up in a plane and gone, flown completely around the Earth. I went to Asia flying in one direction, and I came back flying in another direction. So I have been around the Earth and seen it as round. So it would be hard for me to simultaneously hold to the idea that the Earth is flat. That would cause a level of discomfort, and that's called cognitive dissonance. So what I ask then for you and for myself is, when you develop some flexibility in your belief system, in your models of the world, you become more adaptable. You become more resilient. So when you can step in and say, okay, what if, I'm not saying you need to change your beliefs about anything, but if you're like, what if I didn't believe this, or what if I believed something different? How would that affect me? You can do these mental experiments, and they can prove very fruitful. You can find out, you can learn things about yourself. You can learn things about the world. You can start to empathize with other people as well, because you can take on their perspective better. So now that I've gone through all of that, I spent a quarter of the show talking about models, but I think it's important. I could do an entire show about this, but I'm going to apply this to some shamanic and spiritual stuff, I promise. So I'm going to talk about the astral, and I'm going to talk about first models of, I'm just going to deal with human beings at this point. If you think of a human being, so my model in my brain of a human being is an individual, a person. Okay, human being has a body, they have a mind, they have a spirit. This is my model. Some people have different models. They have different constructs. And of course, there's deletion and distortion going on with my model of what a human being is. I understand that. And if you understand that, it makes taking on new ideas much easier. So in my model of human beings, my concept of what humans are they are complex systems. A human being is a complex system of interpenetrating and interlocking systems. Interlocking may not be a great word, but I have to come up with a better one. Interactive systems. Many, 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 many interactive systems. So I will give you an example. We will take the physical body. If we take that as a single system, the physical part of a human being, we have all of these systems. We have the nervous system, the respiratory system, the circulatory system, the digestive system, the reproductive system, all of these systems. And so just the body is a set of very complex systems. And there are, like I said, there's somebody who studies fish neurology. So you have experts who study just kind of one system at a time. However, let's talk about how these systems interpenetrate, interact, and interlock. So if I just think about my respiratory system, we'll get even simpler. I'll talk about my lungs, just specifically my lungs. Okay, that's part of my respiratory system. Well, my lungs move in part because of the diaphragm muscle in my stomach. So, is my diaphragm part of my respiratory or muscular system? Or are these two systems interacting and interpenetrating somehow? Do they sometimes occupy the same space? Do they work together? We talk about the ribs that go around my lungs, and those are, there are muscles there, and the ribs have a certain amount of cartilage and flexibility, and my ability to breathe is affected by my ribs' ability to flex and move, and the musculature in there. So there's, now we have at least 3 systems working together. Okay, and then inside my lungs, and you'll pardon me if I'm not a doctor, I'm not an expert, but so I'm gonna, if I'm misspeaking a little bit about where things lie, please forgive me. It's just to make a point. So inside my lungs there are nerve cells, whatever, that pick up things like the amount of carbon dioxide I have in my system, and relay that to my brain. So there's an overlap with the nervous system. And of course the nervous system overlaps with the musculature that creates my breathing, and so everything interpenetrates. These systems don't live in isolation. Okay, so the physical body is one system. In many esoteric or occult practices, schools of thought, humans have many bodies. Okay, the physical is one. The physical is dense matter. It's matter, it's very dense, it has mass, it has weight, it has a definite shape. We can deform that shape, we can change it, but it is rather solid. We experience it as rather solid. And then, the the other bodies that essentially overlap and interpenetrate and interact with the physical body and with each other get less and less dense. So, at kind of the next level of density, we have the etheric or energy body, right? And if you've had acupuncture or practiced Tai Chi or gotten Reiki, this is energy body work. Things that may closely align with very close to the physical body, closely align. There are, again, the energy body has many systems. In acupuncture, if you look at, acupuncture charts, there are all these meridians and vessels and, all of this stuff. And, outside of that, outside of the body, you have what's called the etheric double, which is what a lot of people see when they see auras. It's etheric energy that extends outside the body, slightly outside the body, an inch or a couple inches away. And then beyond that is what people call the aura, right? If you see auras, and that can go many, many feet, dozens of feet, or sometimes it's very close, and that is much less formless. It's less dense than the meridians and the vessels, and it's much less dense than the etheric double. So again, the etheric body, and body is a weird term for it because we think of body being very physical, but the etheric body is the closest spiritual body that we have to the physical in this model. And we can talk about density, or we can talk about frequency is the closest frequency to the material world. And the etheric body is very affected by the physical body. So, for example, this is how Tai Chi or Qigong work, right? We move energy around in our bodies by moving our bodies because these things interact. Much like flexing my diaphragm moves air into my lungs. Okay, these things are interactive and interpenetrative. So, if we're going, and again, I'm making these artificial distinctions. This is a model. It is, it's deleting information and it's distorting. So where does one body end and the other one begin? It's really, really hard. It's really up for debate. And it doesn't really matter all that much, to me anyway. And what matters in model, I'm going to go back to models just for a moment. What matters in a model is really how useful it is, how suited it is to purpose. So a street map is very helpful to me if I am navigating in a car, where a topographical map might not be as helpful because I don't need to know the elevations of mountains with no roads on them. I'm not going to be driving through them. But I could still use it as kind of suited. But if I'm trying to determine the elevation of a mountain or the depth of a lake or something like that, then the map in my phone, the GPS in my phone, is probably not going to be suited for that. But they're both models of the same thing. So again, the model is what measures how good a model is. Good is a relative term, but it's really how suited something is to its purpose. So just for explanation, I'm using this model. I realize it's not perfect. And in some esoteric systems, they're going to use these different bodies in different ways. And so they will have a different map of the bodies. And that's totally fine. I understand that these things will differ. I'm okay with that. I understand how models work. I have a model of models. That's very useful. So when we move beyond the etheric, the energy body, kind of the next level down in this model is the astral body. And the astral body is less dense than the etheric. It is a different frequency. I don't know if you would call it higher or lower, but I perceive it as higher in frequency. The physical body, to me, is perceived as, if we're talking about vibrational frequency, as lower in frequency because it's closer, it's physical, it's slower, right? Slower than thought, for example. So let's talk about the astral. People might know astral projection, right? Out-of-body experiences. So the astral is the realm of imagination, and it's really where, our imagination interacts with our spirit. So there's an overlap with what we call the mental body, the emotional body, all of these things. And as we get less dense, as we move away from the physical, things become more formless. So the astral body is more formless than the etheric body. The etheric body very closely follows the pattern of the physical body. When I move my arm, the arm of my etheric double, when I move my physical arm, I'm also moving the meridians that go through my arm that are part of the etheric. And I'm also moving my etheric double in a way and probably affecting my aura a bit. So the astral is much less dense and is much more formless. However, when we astrally travel or dream, when you dream, we're dealing with the astral because, again, it is the realm of imagination. Things can seem to have quite a lot of form. And this is just our consciousness making meaning out of these things. And so when I perform a shamanic journey, which is a type of astral travel, I leave my body using an altered state of consciousness, and I travel in these non-ordinary realms. I am not actually traveling anywhere physical, right? If I go to the lower world, my travel into the earth is metaphoric, right? I'm not going into a pool of lava somewhere or into the core of the earth. I'm traveling to another realm. I'm using my imagination to and metaphor to tune into these realms. But they all, because they are so formless, time and space doesn't really apply to them in the same way that it applies in the physical world. We know that time and space are intimately linked with mass. And the astral body does not have what we would consider mass. So, while time flows in the astral, it is much looser. And this is why we can do things in the astral like look at probable futures. And I will say that the physical future is not set in stone. So anybody who predicts the future is predicting probabilities. Anybody who affects things in the future through magical or esoteric means is affecting probabilities, tipping things in one direction or another. And honestly, that is totally fine. Like that's okay to understand that. So time does flow, but it flows in a really different way, and where we can explore probabilities. We can also go backward in time and explore past lives, or things that happened 10 minutes ago, or what have you, in some level of detail, because those things are recorded. They're recorded in the astral. So the astral projection people kind of know about. And I'll tell you that when I was a boy, I had a number of out-of-body experiences. And at first they frightened me, and then I became really interested in them. And then I found a book in my library about out-of-body experiences, and I tried for a really long time to replicate them with some success and some failure. Didn't really know what I was doing, but thought it was fascinating. Had some lucid dreams as well. Lucid dreaming is very close. And then I started studying shamanism, and shamanism has a tried and true method for getting out of your body and doing work and doing things on the spiritual realm. And that's cool because now I can do this. Now I can do this at will, and it's much more useful. As a kid, I was just curious. My journeys these days are less curious and more purposeful. I do journeys for clients. I do journeys to divine information, to provide healing, that sort of thing. So in a class recently that I was teaching, a student asked, what is the difference between astral travel and shamanic journeying? And my answer to that, and other practitioners might disagree, but the other practitioners I've talked to seem to think that this fits, is that astral travel is mostly, when people do that, when people project astrally, is mostly what we would call a middle world journey in shamanism. It is one type of shamanic journey. And the difference is that when we journey in shamanism, we always go with a helping spirit, particularly in the middle world. The middle world is the spiritual overlay of the physical world, is the astral version of the world that we live in. So we live in the middle world because we live in this. We live in this environment, and there isn't a spiritual component behind everything. Which is at the essence of everything. And that's the astral. And when we travel, when we do middle world journeying, we can see physical objects, but what we're seeing is the astral and etheric representations of those. So we can see spirits, we can see ghosts. Ghosts are also astral beings. Most of the time, at least in my experience, they do not have an etheric component. So one of these days I will deeply explore on this show what happens when we die, and what about ghosts, and what about reincarnation, and all of those things. I'll do that in depth. But when we have ghosts, when they're stuck here, at least in my experience, they are astral. So their mental components, the etheric form, kind of gets stripped away. Now, the astral and the etheric bodies can be strongly affected by our life experiences. That's why acupuncture works. Acupuncture and Reiki work on the etheric. They work on the energy body. And we can have wounds to our energy body. The evil eye is something that exists in the idea of the evil eye is something that exists in many, many cultures. And I can tell you that is a real thing that some people just have. Some people seem to be genetically able to do this. And it is extremely damaging to the etheric body. You can imagine it as sort of like laser beams shooting out of somebody's eye when they feel really angry or jealous or what have you. And it can burn into the etheric body, which can cause sickness and bad luck and all kinds of things. I'll do a whole episode on luck too, because luck isn't just a concept; it's an energy. In my model of things, so the astral. When people astral project, when they practice astral projection and lucid dreaming and stuff, they're traveling, and but they're not going with helping spirits, which is what shamans do. So when I travel in the middle world, I will always ask helping spirits to accompany me. The reason for that is, one is they act as tour guides. They show me if I'm looking for something, or if I'm trying to find a person that I'm working with, or I'm trying to find lost soul essences. And soul essences are astral. I'll talk about that in a moment. So when we travel, the other thing that can happen is, there can be suffering spirits out there. So ghosts and, non-human spirits and all kinds of things. And not always spirits that mean us harm, but spirits that could do us some damage if they just decided to hang out or follow us home or wreak some havoc in our lives. And so helping spirits protect us that way as well. And so, it's a little bit of a caution about astral projection. If it's something you practice all the time, you might want to take up, learn from a shamanic teacher, such as myself or somebody else, shamanic journeying. It'll only make your astral projection better, and it will definitely make it safer. So when I travel in my astral body, the astral body, because it is really affected, the astral is really affected by imagination. And imagination doesn't just mean I'm making things up. It means I'm giving form to something. I'm giving an image, imagine. I'm giving an image to something. So it will appear, and I'll hear sounds, and I'll have sensations that I'll feel, and I'll smell things. But these are not coming in through physical organs. They're coming in as spiritual information interpreted in my consciousness as more or less physical things. Although, it's very loose. There's shape-shifting that can happen. When we talk about shape-shifting, I have never witnessed somebody physically shape-shifting, so I don't know if that is a realistic thing or not. If it is, it's very rare. But I have experienced shape-shifting on the astral, both myself and others. Other people who are, still in human body, but who are, meeting me during a journey. And spirits shapeshift all the time. My helping spirits show up in different ways. So one of the ways this gets really interesting is when you look at spirits from mythology, gods and goddesses and angels and mythological beings, right? And, these things do exist. They exist at least because people have given them form, imaginative form. But, honestly, when you look at how there's overlap between all of the myths of the world, you realize that there's something to it. There's an essence there. There's something underneath it that's happening. But what you do have very frequently is you will have gods and goddesses or certain beings that will take on different forms depending upon how they're represented. So for example, in Hinduism and some forms of like tantric Buddhism and stuff, you'll have deities who will have like I don't know what you call it, like a happy form and a wrathful form. And the wrathful form might be very brutal looking, for example. It certainly happens in Greek mythology. You hear a lot of shape-shifting. Zeus was always turning himself into stuff. Right. So because these beings that we might consider gods and goddesses can show up in different forms, it doesn't mean they're different beings. And even different names for the same being. Because honestly, spiritual beings that are that advanced and that advanced is kind of a weird word, but they really are like foreign to the point of being space aliens for us to try to understand. For us to try to understand them, we anthropomorphize them, meaning we give them human form. So we, depending upon your beliefs, many religions and spiritual belief systems have a very person-like image of God. If you are monotheistic or if you are polytheistic, you probably have gods and goddesses that are more or less human-formed. there are some differences. We have what are called therianthropes, which are beings that are half beast and half human, or some part human. So we have things like fauns and satyrs, which are, either part goat and part human, or part horse and part human. And we have harpies, which are, birds with human heads, and we have sirens. The sirens who can appear as mermaids, or, so half fish, half human, or half bird and half human. So those are things, And so that's a very common shamanic theme as well. And we see that in cave paintings from tens of thousands of years ago. We see human beings with deer antlers, or we see people turning into buffalo, and that is such a common theme, and it's one of many, many reasons why we think shamanism goes back to the beginnings of human symbolic thought, right? Where people started adopting spirituality and doing art, making representations of things in deep caves, which we're pretty sure those were, the reason for that was spiritual. Like, if you were living from hunt to hunt in a very harsh environment, you probably wouldn't crawl on your belly through a 1/4-mile long cave to spend, years, decades, even, sometimes there are cave paintings that are, thousands of years apart in the same cave just to paint some art in a place where you weren't living. Because we know that there are these caves that are full of paintings that have no evidence of people living or eating in them, So pretty sure that these were, and because of the images, that these were spiritual things. So were people at one time able to turn into animals in the physical realm? I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't understand how it could be possible, but there are lots of things today that we didn't think were possible some time ago, faster than light communication and quantum entanglement and, space travel and flight. So I think of my grandmother. My grandmother just turned 105. She was born in 1916 in Bath, Maine. Still around, still kicking. And when I think about what it was like when she was born in 1916, and if I had been around then and told her, say she was 5, 1921, and I had told her, in your lifetime, we will send spacecraft, to the end of the solar system, and we will send people into space, and people will walk on the moon. And how crazy might I have sounded? And yeah, there was sci-fi back then. There was H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and all of that stuff back then. But, that was pretty fanciful. And if I had, if I had told her that we would have machines where we could see inside the human body using magnets, that would have sounded crazy. Very unrealistic. So who knows? Who knows what's possible? Nobody knows what's possible. We know it's probable. And that's exciting to me. So let's talk about the astral plane. So this is a thing, and people think when they're traveling, they're astrally projecting to the astral plane as if there is one. That's sort of like me saying, I'm traveling to Europe. Sure, where? Where in Europe? There are many, am I traveling to Eastern Europe? Am I traveling to Western Europe? Am I traveling to the parts of Europe where they speak French? Am I going to the Alps? Am I going to northern Scandinavia? That not really specific. Europe is a general location. as is the astral plane, because so shamans, when we journey, generally we recognize three worlds: the upper world, the middle world, and the lower world. And you can see why the world tree or the axis mundi are important symbols in shamanism, because the roots of the tree connect beneath the earth and the branches go up to the sky, and the trunk of the tree is where we are. So it's very representative, I guess that's a better word, representative of man and how we can travel up, we can travel down, and we kind of live here. But those three worlds, again, are like saying I'm going to Europe. There are many, many worlds. I don't know how many, probably infinite. There are people who are mapping out these worlds, which I find fascinating. I have little areas that I go to pretty regularly when I journey. And up and down are metaphors, they're symbols. Again, it's just about tuning the consciousness to different layers of reality. So one model, one way, one representation that I like to look at this as a metaphor. If you think about, if you had, there used to be, maybe still have these anatomy books, right? And they had sheets of clear acetate or plastic. And, it would start with a page that had the skeletal system, and, then you would have a piece of plastic that would lay over that would show the muscles, and that would lay over the skeletal system. And then you would have another clear piece of plastic that would lay over that, which might be the organs, right? Or, the different systems. And then another one that might be the blood vessels. And then, another one that would lay over that would have the skin, that sort of thing. There were representations like that. And if you take all of those kind of sandwiched together, that's a little bit what the world is like from my perspective, what the worlds are like from my perspective. They all kind of exist together. They interact and interpenetrate, just like the human body does. And because they don't occupy physical space always, although the etheric does sort of occupy physical space, but the astral does not, travel is really metaphoric. But it's the only way, because we are so tied into the physical, living in the physical and traveling around in the physical, and time and space have meaning for us, it tends to be how we interpret things on the astral plane. So I want to talk briefly about what can happen to the astral body, and this is where shamanic healing comes into place. So another term for the astral body, and again, people might use these terms differently, but this is how I use them. Another term for the astral body is the soul body. And the soul body, I'm using these terms interchangeably. I don't recognize really a difference from them or between them. And so the soul body, or the astral body, is definitely affected by our life experiences. It can be wounded. It can be drained of energy. All kinds of things can happen to it. And this is where much of shamanic healing comes in. Now, you might have heard of something called soul retrieval. That is a shamanic healing ceremony that is meant to help with trauma. And what happens with trauma is part of our soul body can break off and get lost. It basically splits to seek safety. And if that doesn't return on its own, that can get lost. And what happens is that bubbles, again, these layers affect each other. And that can manifest as sickness. It can manifest as depression, dissociation, all kinds of things. And so, a shamanic practitioner will do a soul retrieval ceremony that will be meant to restore some of these soul essences, which will bring healing ability back to a person. Now, a lot of people go to shamanic healing and they expect miraculous healing. I've got, diabetes or lung cancer or kidney disease or something, and if you do a soul retrieval for me, I am going to be miraculously healed on the physical plane. Unfortunately, most of the time it doesn't quite work that way. What happens is that, and I don't think it works that way with most or really any type of spiritual healing. I could be wrong. Again, anything's possible. But what happens is we create these spiritual conditions under which you can heal better. So sometimes soul retrieval will provide relief from things like depression or dissociation, that, some of those symptoms, because the underlying spiritual conditions are fixed. But sometimes there is also physical healing that needs to take place. So, talk about depression for a second. So some people might get relief from soul retrieval, and some people might have physical problems that have to be healed to solve a depression issue. So depression, some people associate that with low levels of serotonin. So maybe your body's not producing enough serotonin. There are very frequently, my understanding is with depressed people, there are inflammatory markers in their blood. So you might have to treat inflammation in your body. But again, it will be helpful to have the spiritual healing. And I always tell clients that, spiritual healing works really well hand in hand with other forms of healing, which might include, allopathic medicine, naturopathic medicine. It might include acupuncture. It might include dietary changes, exercise, physical therapy, what have you. You should not pass those things up in favor of spiritual healing. We so often, with a picture of the person in our head of a man laying his hands on somebody and that person can walk all of a sudden. And it happens. It happens from time to time. The faith healers you see on TV are mostly fake and unfortunately take advantage of a lot of people. And those people, when they follow up with them afterwards, somebody throws their crutches down and walks around. When they do follow-ups with those people, they generally don't have long-term effects from the work, from the whatever is supposed to have happened. Even though there's a placebo effect, and placebo is really the mental body affecting the physical. And even with that, these faith healers, I would say most, if not all of them, particularly if they're on TV asking for your money, are not really doing anything. And I'm sorry if that is if that thought is discouraging to somebody or something along those lines. But there has been so much fraud. There's a guy I've seen on TV recently who had a huge following years ago, and he got caught. He had an earpiece in his ear, and they were feeding him information about people in the audience that they had researched. And some investigative crew went in there and using radio equipment picked up the signal from the control room that said, "Oh, over on your left side is Mrs. Smith, and she has a son who's suffering from, diabetes, and she has back pain and whatever." And then you would see this guy on TV going, "Oh, over here, I feel there's Mrs. Smith, and oh, your son's got diabetes." And then people would take that as a sign that he was getting information from God or what have you. And he would put his hands on them and go, oh, you're healed, and then walk away. And he would never, there'd be no follow-up or anything. And he was stealing a lot of money from people. And when he was found out and it was revealed he was a fraud, he lost almost everything. Well, guess what? He's back, it's 10 or 20 years later, he's back on TV doing the exact same thing. I really dislike that. I have to be honest. I really dislike that. I dislike a lack of ethics, particularly in the world of spirituality. I do believe in karma, so I do believe that he's probably going to suffer for the rest of his life. He's probably suffering now that he feels like he has to do this rather than making an honest living or actually helping people. But he's a con man and he's still at it, unfortunately. And there's a lot of people who want to have miraculous healing and faith and all of these things. And I appreciate that. And I have a great deal of faith in spiritual healing and the power of the mind to heal and the power of the spirit to heal. But I don't think that's what this guy is doing. I don't think he has mended his ways. I think he's, when I watch him, I can see some of the tricks that he's doing to people where he, grasps people by the head and puts his thumbs over their eyes and pushes them down on the floor. And here's a woman who's been on crutches, and people think it's the power of divinity knocking that woman over to heal her. And I was like, I could do that to anybody right now. I could, if they let me grab their head and put my thumbs over their eyes, I could knock anybody down. Don't care how big or strong you are, but especially if you're an older woman or an older person, doesn't matter to have to be a woman, an older person on crutches. It's obscene. Anyway, off I go on a tangent. So really this is meant to give you an understanding of the astral. There's been, there's a book and a mini series, I think on Netflix, called Behind Her Eyes, and that prompted somebody to ask me recently on the radio about astral projection. And is it a thing? Is it real? Can people take over other people's bodies? And that's it's a TV-ized version of that. And, it is not very realistic. But, there's, like everything, there's some truth to it as well. And so there's been some interest in it. And so every so often there's a resurgence and interest in astral travel and remote viewing and all of these things. And I may be biased towards shamanism, but if this is something you're interested in, take a course in, take an introduction to shamanism class. I'm not saying you've got to take the shamanic path for the rest of your life. That's definitely not for everyone. But, if you're interested in soul travel, it would behoove you to take an intro to shamanism class and learn a safe and effective and controlled method of doing that. There may be some others out there I'm not aware of. I haven't seen any. But shamans have been doing this for, millennia and millennia. So we're well practiced. Shamanic practitioners, we know what we're doing. And a good teacher will be able to walk you through these things very safely, very quickly, and very effectively. I struggled for years trying to control astral projection. And then when I learned Shamanic Journey, I was like, oh, geez, that's I can do this anytime I want. Wow, that's something. But there's some aspects that you have to learn. So I am at just about an hour. I'm going to wrap up this episode. I hope this has been interesting. I hope you have found some things useful here. And, don't forget to subscribe to the show if you are not. Also, just a couple of announcements on my side. I do have a YouTube channel that I've launched recently. It's called Shaman's Tent. You can find it by searching on YouTube. And there's, over 50 videos on there. They're all instructional and informational. And I have launched an app as well, which is called Shaman World, the Shaman World app. It's on iOS and Android. It's absolutely free. There's currently not even any advertising or anything on it. It has links. You can listen to this podcast on it. You can watch videos. You can read articles. There are drum tracks if you decide if you practice shamanism on there. So there's all kinds of stuff there. And so all of this stuff is absolutely 100% free. And as is this podcast, it's just my way of talking about and sharing something I love and that I'm absolutely passionate about. And with that, I will wrap it up. I hope you are happy and healthy, and I will talk to you real soon.
You have been listening to Speaking Spirit with your host, John Moore. For more info or to contact John, go to mainshaman.com. That's maineshaman.com.